This is Jonathan Yates with HBCU Game Day Network. We're on Capitol Hill with Congressman Mark Walker from the state of North Carolina. Representative, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
It's our privilege. Thanks for having us.
Well, Representative, the NCAA has proved that you were on the side of history with the Student Athlete Equity Act. What led you to first believe that college athletes should be compensated?
Well, this is something that I remember moving to North Carolina in 1991. The heyday of Bobby Hurley and Christian Laettner at Duke University, Grant Hill and Brian Davis and all the guys. And it wasn't long before they encountered a team called the Fab Five from Michigan. Chris Webber and all those guys. And three of those players went on to great fame. But I remember thinking back, for Jimmy King and Ray Jackson, two of the five, they never were able to have any kind of access to their image, even though they changed fundamentally the face of college basketball with the long shorts and the black socks. But I remember how everybody else was getting pretty wealthy based on their behalf. They were Sports Illustrated front cover. I think the Coach Fisher signed a multi-million-dollar contract. That's when the seed first planted. A couple years ago, after I was elected to Congress, I went and met with Jay Billis in Charlotte. We began to talk about this issue and say, listen, something doesn't seem right with this setup that the only segment of our society that doesn't have access to the free market is the student athlete. And that's when I began to really dig into this over the last couple of years of research.
And so what do you think led the NCAA to change their position?
Well, I appreciate the compliment there. I certainly don't take the full credit on this. I believe it was a conglomeration approach. I believe California, their move as far as getting it through their state legislature. We dropped our legislation in March or April. We got some energy from it, some push on it. And then when California's there dropped theirs early summer, people looked and said, is there a federal companion to this? And since there already was, that's when this thing really exploded as far as having a lot of attention around this particular piece of legislation.
Do you think that you inspired California with your bill?
Well, I can't say that. I've not talked to the governor there. And really, I'm not really concerned as so much who gets credit for this, as long as it ultimately gets resolved. When you have a group of our population, close to 500,000 student athletes, that literally have to sign a document, a ban, saying that as long as I'm part of said university, then you own my access, or you own all access to my name, image, and likeness. That's a problem, because it is only the student athlete, as opposed to those working in business, education, music, whatever it might be, that the ban only applies to the student athlete. No other scholarship athlete, and in fact, our student, no other student as a whole has to do such. And I just felt like maybe now is the time that we're getting some momentum, and I'm hoping the NCAA will really follow through on this.
Now, Representative, even though I thought it was a great victory for you and Jay Billis and others, Representative Cedric Mitchman, I was watching him yesterday. He did not seem to be, taking a victory lap at all. He did not seem to think that the NCAA had honorable intentions with this. That he said that, he thought it was just cut off the legislation at the state and federal level.
Yes. Jay and I both initially had the same reaction. We didn't even know it till we communicated a little bit later in the day. I did not see his press release. We put something out, then came back and compared. It was very similar. This is not something that the NCAA has just been made aware of over the last couple of months. This is something they've been promising to resolve for the last 2 or 3 years. So I got the impression they took a page out of the political playbook, or a politician's playbook, and kind of kicking the can down the road when they said, we're going to send this back to the 3 levels of divisions to be able to come back and give us some solutions, and then we'll make a decision if it's best for the student. Now, listen, I'm glad that at least they did say that we need to address this, but I'm hesitant, maybe a little cautious here as far as just saying that this situation has been resolved.
So, Congressman, what did you hear from the schools in your district? North Carolina is a powerhouse state. You have 10 HBUs, 4 ACC schools. East Carolina and Appalachian State are F Football Bowl subdivision members. I mean, Appalachian State's in the top 20. So, what did you hear from them?
Yeah, we're very proud of the HBCUs that are in our state. We represent North Carolina A&T, the largest HBCU in the country. A little shout out to Tariq Cohen, who is a running back for the Chicago Bears there that just played a couple years ago at A&T. Chris Paul, Tim Duncan. I mean, the list goes long as far as former high-profile student athletes at our colleges through the ACC and the HBCU arena. So that's why it's not just that it's important to North Carolina. And I'll mention that as far as from a California legislative perspective, the reason that a North Carolina or California can't resolve this just by itself is because it would give an unfair recruiting advantage.
Yes.
for example, and you know college sports enough, if California colleges are recruiting and telling these student athletes that in California you can have access to your image or likeness, but in North Carolina or Alabama you can't. That's why, because the NCAA is a national governing body, this is why this legislation has to be resolved on a federal level. And I applaud the people in the legislatures that are working on it from a state, and it's helped continue to bring more awareness and more attention. But you and I know that you can't have a situation in college sports where there's unfair practices.
Sure. I mean, think about it. Wake Forest and Appalachian State are in the top 20 football with no California team, so maybe they do need the recruiting advantage.
Exactly right.
But speaking of advantage, on the other side of the hill, Senator Romney yesterday said, you know, he supports the NCAA move, but he's worried about sort of the rich getting richer. It's his thing. He said, you know, he didn't want to see some athletes driving around in Ferraris while others couldn't meet their needs. I mean, you know, Duke, Carolina, they have a tremendous advantage over the HBCUs. How do you make sure there's a level playing field?
Yeah, I disagree with Senator Romney a little bit on this, because we're not talking about, and this is the misnomer, and I think even the NCAA has tried to create a little bit of a smokescreen around this. Nowhere in this legislation are we asking the NCAA or the college or university to pay a single dollar. What we're saying is just open up the free markets. Why wouldn't these student athletes be able to capitalize on their image and likeness when every other American can do so? And the truth is that Nike and Adidas, they're not going to come in and sign 450,000 student athletes. This legislation is for the 99% who will never receive a single dollar from a professional sports contract or agency. These are the ladies and the men who are busting their rear ends for 40 hours on a volleyball court, or in the gymnasium, or on a football field, sometimes in a backup role. And here's the thing that few people I've heard talk about is, of those 450,000 or so, nearly 200,000 are not even on scholarship. So these folks, not even on scholarship, are still having to sign the same moratorium saying they have no image or access to my name, image, or likeness. When in some cases, you could go back to your hometown, you could go to a different place and pick up a couple $100s for an appearance fee, something along those lines. And when you figure this, and this is something that came out in the research, is that we discovered that 40 to 45% of these student athletes that play in the big so-called money-making sports come from impoverished communities.
Sure.
And that should bring an awakening or awareness to all of us to say, listen, are we being fair to the student population who comes from such impoverished arenas and still continuing to ban their access to their own image and likeness?
Now, you come from a unique background, having been a pastor before running for elected office, and I spent much of my career on Capitol Hill, and I do development work for my church, and I've always said, you know, you don't go into the pulpit and you don't go into politics unless you truly care about other people and want to help them. Do you look upon that as part of your mission now with this bill, trying to help these athletes from the impoverished backgrounds?
100%, but I hope my path to working on civil rights and undoing injustices didn't start as a politician. I hope it started as a pastor. Yes, many of those years we spent time in the inner cities of Cleveland and New York and Baltimore running music and sports camps to make sure that we were getting a proper understanding and education as far as what goes on specifically in some of these communities who are either underprivileged or impoverished. So when I transitioned from the pulpit, if you will, from a pastor to a politician, even though I still have a tough time getting that out of my mouth sometimes.
Public servant.
Yeah, public. I like that's even better. I got to remember that. I wanted to take that same spirit with me, not trying to pat myself on the back, but Republicans have far too long stumbled when it comes time to talking about some of the injustices from even 5 or 6 decades ago, and not just Republicans as a whole, but you mentioned the evangelical world, even going back to sometimes when we looked the other way when some of our friends couldn't use the same restroom. I come from Greensboro, a lot of history there, speaking of North Carolina A&T, at the Woolworth lunch counter. Republicans need to do a better job of talking about and going to bat for some who still are in communities that in some cases have been left behind.
Well, what led you to run for office?
Well, the thing that drove me the most is because I do believe in individual liberty and opportunity, and I believe the less government in your life, the better chance you have. And I wanted to be able to talk about these issues from that perspective without sometimes bringing the condemnation or the judgmental spirit that we have across certain segments of our community. Just pull your bootstraps up. Well, when you're in a community sometimes, and the only thing that you know is to survive, as opposed to thrive, I wanted to go and talk about those things and talk about, listen, don't let the federal government create such a victimhood mindset if I could put my minister's hat back on for a second, that it robs you of the very purpose that I believe God has created for you. And those are the things that I wanted to talk about, and without having any kind of political background or experience, I just felt led to jump in this, and the doors opened up. I could say God opened up some doors there, and we walked through them, and here we are.
So based on your success, Senator Elizabeth Warren came out yesterday and said that she supports athletes being unionized. And Senator Cory Booker and Senator Bernie Sanders, both running for president, have running on a ticket where they want to pay college athletes too. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'll stop short of talking about college athletes being unionized. I think that's going to create a whole different set of complex problems. I don't know how that you could come up with some kind of pay grade system. Even the profit sharing has some complexities. And listen, I'm open to whatever the NCAA wants to come. I'm a limited government guy. The NCAA is a nonprofit. I hope they can fix their issues. Where I do feel like the federal government has a role is when we feel like somebody's rights are being violated. In this case, we do. I think that is when the federal government has a role to step in and says, no, you can't do business as usual here. You go back to the drawing board and figure out how. I stopped short of coming into these nonprofits like the NCAA, as big as they are, and saying this is exactly how you have to do it, because I think that could set a dangerous precedent.
You brought up probably the most important statistic or number in college sports. 99.4% are not going to have careers in the pros.
Correct.
And those that do, the average career is only 3 or 4 years, and for them, more than half go bankrupt after retiring. So it's not a pretty picture. There are great programs from University of North Carolina. They have a program called Complete Carolina, which means, once you go there as a student athlete, you can come back at any time and finish your degree. When William & Mary recruits, they hand you a chart and say, these are the 150 players who have come here and earned master's degrees. I had one of those on my show. He earned 3 degrees at William & Mary, going there as a walk-on. Have you looked at, focusing more college efforts on this? At, hey, why don't you players start graduating with 2 or 3 degrees?
Yeah, that there's an education component to that, and I serve on a couple committees. Where we're trying to go with an access to name, image, and likeness is through the Ways and Means that changes the tax code to allow that amateur status to be changed. I do believe you make a valid point more under the Education and the Labor Committee side of things to be able to make those modifications. I do think the colleges and universities have a specific role in this, not necessarily to pay the players, but to offer every incentive they can to be able to encourage. Maybe it's a little bit more unorthodox than the standard student because of the time constraints that student athletes have on them. So to hear things like Carolina doing their commitment there, and William & Mary and some of the stories there, I applaud that. It's just not necessarily my specific field that I'm working to accomplish right now. So
like Deion Sanders, you played 3 varsity sports in college. Did you ever think you would see the day when, that college sports would become a presidential political issue? Well,
in full disclosure, I played at such a small college. That's like saying you played at a high school 3 sports. I did play 3 sports.
It's all a matter of perspective.
Well, it's a matter of perspective, especially when you show up and you realize how good everybody else is. That's when your priorities should start to change there.
Well, I'm sure your staff looks at you that way.
Well, it was. We won't tell them. How about that? So, but no, I do think it is something that we need to continue to move forward on. I'm proud of my background with it, but I do think this is not that complex of a situation. And I think it's past time. When I was talking to our press secretary today about this, I said, when I go to an event, the biggest question that I have to figure out that evening is, hey, where are we going to go to dinner afterwards? But for many families, the biggest question they have to figure out is, how do we get gas money to go see our son and daughter who sometimes are on the program of the event that they are headed to? And that's a travesty. We've got to get that up. This teaches entrepreneurship of these young students, and I'm convinced that it reduces the middleman, if you know enough about these college sports and some of the things going on there. And I think it's even an incentive for many to be able to stay in school once they can reap some kind of revenue based on their name, image, and likeness. Well,
Representative Walker, on behalf of college athletes across the country and the HBCUs, I thank you for your good work, sir, and taking the time to be with us. This is Jonathan Yates with HBCU Game Day Network. Thank you for joining us.